understatement to say that it is a blessing to be here, and I am just overjoyed and overwhelmed, and going to pray that I get through this message, which means so much to me. I made a commitment years ago to, inspired by Tony Evans, to not study the Bible for yourself. Get to know God for yourself. Don't preach because you find something. Study the Bible for yourself, and then let people in on what you are studying. And I am so grateful this morning to preach that, and to and also as I reflect on the Sallys. You know, we joke a lot, and I have a warped and twisted relationship with Pastor Sally. But I was sitting in the back, and for some reason I just looked at all of the stuff that they have stuck with me through. A lot of it is funny, and a lot of it wasn't good, but they stuck with me, and I was laughing and crying. And I'm older than them, but trust me, sometimes they have been my mother and my father, my sister and my brother. And I really appreciate that from you too. I mean that. I love you. And their family, Kyle and the girls and all of them. Boy, that could be another book. I'm going to share with you, this has been a struggling year for me, and in a lot of areas. And one of the things that, reason why I'm in this verse, this chapter in this verse, is in God's hands. Matter of fact, turn to your neighbor and ask your neighbor, whose hand are you in? Maybe by the end you'll be able to answer that. This has been a struggling year for me as I have learned painfully to things that I've had in my hand, and I think it was Corey ten Boom says, I learned to hold things loosely in my hand because I don't like it when God pries them away from me. And that is true. And there are so many things that I give to God and then I take back. Maybe it's just me. I give to God and then I take back. And I have struggled with some things, and I finally let go. Let go of some stuff, and I placed it in his hands. There are over 100 verses about God's hands in the Bible. And our hands sometimes are something that we don't really think about, we take for granted until we look at somebody that ain't got hands. And I'm going to get to that point in a minute. But I remember when my kids were young, babies, and I would have this thing with Kelly and all of them, and I would take them and I would throw them high in the air, and then I would catch them. And that was so funny because I always hear Celeste downstairs, you better not drop my babies. Tim, stop. And they, of course, loved it. They loved it. They said, you do again, Daddy, do again. And she said, just one time, you drop them, you drop them. And I mean, I would throw them high, too. Poor baby, right. But they loved it. They never got scared. They loved it. Why? Because they felt safe in their father's hands. Because I had never dropped them. If you had a baby and whatever, and you dropped it and continued to drop it, how safe that baby want to go in your hands again? Like, no, mom, no. They were safe in my hands because their daddy never dropped them. And they loved it. And they got used to me coming home, and then when they saw me, and they would go, oh, because I knew what they wanted. Throw me there. I used to do my grandkids that way too. Because they felt safe. We trust people in our lives, and we put them in our hands unknowingly. When you go on the plane, you don't know that pilot. You don't know where he's from. You don't know his background. All you are trusting the airlines to know, do he have a license? Can he drive? Can he get me to where I need to go? And probably you would have some issues if he came out the cockpit and then he didn't have any arms. You would probably have some concerns there a little bit. I trust him, but can I, is there any way that we could get, I'm just saying, you would have some concerns and some questions, a lot of questions. There are people that we trust to carry us. There are some people that we trust to hold us. Pastor Sally alluded last week to one of my favorite stories I want to share with you, one of my favorites, and it was a young man by the name of Mephibosheth. Now, let me give you a little background on Mephibosheth. He was the grandson of Saul, and he was limp and crippled. Now, this is how he became limp and crippled, because at that time, when one king became king, he had to wipe out everybody, babies and all. They didn't care, because if somebody was to come up and say, the kingdom is mine, they wanted to make sure that nobody can come and say that I was the rightful heir to the throne. And so Saul, because of Saul's mess, they came and killed his son, and then they came and also looked for his son and the grandson. Get this. As the raiding parties came, the nurse grabbed Mephibosheth, grabbed him, and tried to run him to safety. In her running, she tripped and fell, and he was limp the rest of his life in both legs. She didn't mean to drop him. It wasn't her intentions to drop him. She was trying to save him. There are some people some of us have been dropped. And it may not have been that person's fault. A husband dropped us. A wife dropped us. Our family dropped us. Society dropped us. We've been dropped. And he walked around with a limp and a disability. And he was so ashamed, he lived in a land called Lodabar. Lodabar means a land of desolation, deserted. And everywhere he went, he looked. Now, if you really want to be honest, especially on Facebook, if a person has a disability, what's the first thing we look at? It really is the disability. If they're walking and whatever, I'm not saying that you will be mean, but that's the first thing that you recognize is what? They ain't got no arm, or they're walking with a limp, or they got, and that's what they look everywhere. And also, think about it. We also describe people by their disability sometimes. I was working last year, and again, it wasn't nothing mean, at this production place, and we were walking, and we had to, of course, lift boxes and put them on the line. There was this one guy who didn't have an arm. Well, he had an arm, but he couldn't really fold it. But guess what? And he was a great guy, good friend of mine. But everywhere I noticed that when we described him, we would say, oh, you know James with the one arm? Not just James with the broken arm. Now, he did pack boxes better than us. He really did. But we described him by his disability. And so Mephibosheth had a disability, and he walked around because he couldn't. And David, and not to get into the story of him, but David asked, is there anybody of Saul's house that I can show mercy to? Long story short, basically they said it was Mephibosheth. And he still, when he sent for him, he was still scared because he thought, oh, this is the end. Oh, by the way, too, I remember, going back a little bit, I remember when I was on Princeton and I had the recovery home. I think I mentioned this before in a sermon. There was actually a church across from Gilgal Place, and guess the name of the church was? Lodabar. I had kept telling the guys laughing, I said, I've got to respectfully ask the pastor, why is your church named Lodabar? I remember one time we had a whole discussion. He said, well, Reverend Tim, maybe because he wants people to come in, but Lodabar? A church of desolation? I said, there's got to be an explanation for that. But anyway, I digress. So, yes. David was able to bring Mephibosheth before him, and he was trembling, and he thought this is the end. Maybe David is going to put an end to him. But he says, listen, from this point on, you're going to be able to sit at the king's table. And everything that your father had, your grandfather had, and all of that is going to be restored to you. And as Pastor pointed out, and I've pointed out, one of the things when you're sitting at the table, you ain't got to stand. You're sitting at the table. Nobody looking at what your disabilities are. Sometimes we have been dropped because some people have so many things in their hands, and some of our parents, some of our friends are carrying some things, and we're carrying so many bags. And in the words of that prophetess Erykah Badu, bag lady, pack light. You got too much stuff. And we trying to gather some things, and I've learned this the hard way, and juggling, and somebody along the line gets dropped. And sometimes it's not there. The person didn't mean to drop them, but we've been dropped, and we hurt, and we carry those scars and those disabilities. But we're going to talk about putting everything in God's hands, putting it in his hands. There are three things I want to leave with you in this short period of time. And by the way, there are so many verses about that. If you want to take, like you said, Pastor say, if you're writing this down, verses. And I noticed that Isaiah has more verses about God's hands than pretty much any verse. Isaiah 48:13 is one. Isaiah 49:16. Isaiah 41:13. Isaiah 40:12. Isaiah 46:4. 42:6. For time's sake, just those awesome verses about God's hands, putting it in God's hands. In this verse, our key verse here is, you will be a glorious crown in the Lord's hand. You will no longer be called deserted, Lodabar, and your land will not be called desolate. thank God for redemption. Thank God for what he has brought in our lives when it comes to being placed in his hand. There's a famous, they are still around, insurance company that says, "You in what? Good hands." Right. You're in good hands. So we put our hands in the place of people all the time, but we want to talk about putting it in God's hands. We need our hands. Our hands are important. Our hands are important to show affection, show love, show peace, shake. There's a lot of things that our hands are required, and we don't really think about it until we look at somebody who don't. And I'm also very encouraged, especially when I watch videos of people who don't have hands and have accomplished all sorts of obstacles or went over obstacles despite the fact that they didn't have hands or some other disability. Place it in God's hand. 3 quick things I want to leave with you. When we place things in God's hands, 3 things happen. The first one is placing things in God's hands will change and reform your perspective. What do I mean by that? Reform or change your perspective. David was getting ready to fight Goliath. And here the children of Israel, the armies of Israel, were standing out there, and this big 9-foot guy came, and that's all the perspective that the armies could see. We can't win, and nobody was able or willing to go and fight this giant. And they even gave David a hard time about it. And they would tell David, they would say, "He's too big to hit." David said, "He's too big to miss." When he changes your perspective about how things are, when we look at some things and we have to change our perspective, change our view, he reforms our perspective, reforms our view of how things are. Elisha in 2 Kings, I believe it is, there was an opportunity when Elisha was being chased by the armies of one king. And his servant there turned and looked around, and all of these men surrounded. And he told them, he says, my Lord, what shall we do?" Elisha was like, "We got this." He says, "But look, we getting ready to get..." He says, "Lord, open his eyes." And he opened his eyes and he saw what Elisha saw. And Elisha said, "What? Those that are with us are more than those." He reforms your perspective, reforms how, and I wrestled, I wish I had time to tell you even this year, of how I looked at things and how I held things and how I just wanted God to sign off on my program. Just let me just do this, because this is the way that I'm looking at it. This makes sense. How come you can't just sign off and let me do this? And he changed my view. And do you know, one of the prayers I would encourage you to pray for God to show you what he didn't let you have and why. This is the reason why I didn't let you have this. His preparation, he prepares us for what he has prepared for us, but the preparation process is sometimes painful. but it is a process. Number two, first of all, he reforms your perspective. Then the next thing is he reveals your purpose. And of course, you know the famous verse, Jeremiah 29:11, what? I know the plans I have for you. Plans to what? Prosper you. And then also in Jeremiah 32:19, we talked about Jeremiah yesterday in Bible study, the weeping prophet. You know, and I was, after Bible study, I was just laughing. I can just imagine people say, oh, there come that crying prophet again. What he got to say now? He gonna cry and complain about something. 32:19 says, if I can get it here, it talks about, and I'm actually reading, the one great in counsel and powerful in action. Your eyes are on the ways of the children of men in order to reward each person according to the ways as the result of his action. He talks about your purpose, what you want to do, what God has for you to do, the purpose why you are here. And then, of course, Romans 8:28 says what? All things work together for what? Good to them that love God. So the second thing is he reveals his purpose for you. As we put it in God's hands, he reforms your perspective. He reveals your purpose. Number 3, he releases your possibilities. He releases your possibilities. How does he release your possibilities? By using what you have. In Exodus, Moses gave all sorts of excuses of why he could not be who God wanted him to be. God looked at him and says, what do you have in your hand? A staff. Throw it down. God will use what you have. I struggle and have struggled over the years with trying to be, part of my struggles has always been trying to be someone else, or trying to be someone else, or trying to be like someone else. And God has shown me what I have for you is for you. What you have in your life, I'm going to use it for my glory, Tim. For my glory. It'll be for your good. Be who I have called you to be. Reforms your perspective, reveals your purpose, and it releases your possibility by using what we have. When we place things, that's a simple, we've heard that down through the years, even our grandmothers. When we have a problem, old grandmothers, I can hear them saying, baby, just put it in God's hands. It's going to be all right. Just put it in his hands. Man, that's powerful. This is supposed to get a newer one, but brand new, this costs probably about $20. Maybe more. Yeah, maybe a little bit more. Maybe more. $20. And in the hands of LeBron James,
Or Michael Jordan.
I knew somebody was going to be a hater. I knew I shouldn't have used sports for this illustration. Some told me don't use sports for this illustration. Right. Championships, millions of dollars. You put it in his hands. Josiah left my football, so pretend this is a football. Right, I forgot. Put this same, right, in Justin Fields' hands. Okay. Or Barry Sanders' hands. There you go. Thank you. Put it in his hands. In his hands. Championships, millions of dollars. My guys here gonna help me with this one. I think the highest paid player, I can't pronounce his name, start with an O. What is it? Otani. Put it in my hands, and great pictures. But he's the highest paid player, I understand, this year. And the best, not highest. Put it in his hands, it's different. It's in whose hand is it in? I do so as I say that. Well, despite what you think about him, if you, and Pastor Sally knows more about golf, I do not know how to play this game. Except for that, there's a ball that needs to go in the hole. At some point. Yeah. So putting it in my hands would, yes, be disastrous. Pastor Sally plays okay, I understand, and yeah, guys. Or put it in Tiger Woods' hands. It's a different ball game. Back in the day, she said. I could probably put some pieces, take a nail and put some pieces together, maybe build a birdhouse with those nails. And maybe you could build something with nails too. But the nail that went through Jesus' hands, the nails that pierced his hands, is the reason why you're here. Amen. Amen. And because of the nails that pierced his hands, amen. And it's those same hands that he told Thomas. Thomas says, I won't believe it until I see the nails pierced in his hands. I can just imagine when he was at the upper room and he looked at Thomas and he said, come put your hands in the nails pressed in my hands. I just want to encourage you. Whatever you're struggling with, whatever you're holding on with, health, mental, children, whatever issues, if you're like me and you're struggling, you're trying to hold on to it because sometimes that blanket of security is stuff that you need to let go. I remember, it's kind of funny, but it's a good story, when I was married, and to Valerie's granddaughter named Kamora. And I remember when she was a baby, she had this blanket, just like your kids would go up. It was just, and they would, of course, get dirty and nasty. And you could not take it from her. No way. There had to be a whole thing. We had to trick her and whatever. And even that she would know, if she was sleeping, she would know it was gone. Now, she didn't know that the blanket was dirty and nasty and full of germs for her. It was her security blanket. She wanted it. Just like some of the toys we have, or mama and them give us, and we have to wash them later on. We have to trick them, but they want them. There's some things that we want to hold on to that God is saying, let it go. Let it go. And man, the last couple of months, I've had to let some stuff go. And I'll leave you with this, what my therapist said to me as I screamed and yelled and whatever. He said, don't listen to the voices. Listen to the whisper. Listen to the whisper, Tim. That's what he told the prophet. God was not in the whirlwind. He wasn't in the fire. He wasn't in that. He was in the what? It was the whisper. I'm telling you, about a week ago, must have been 2 o'clock in the morning, dreams and going through stuff. Oh man, I heard his whisper. Laying in the bed, he simply said, I got you. I got you. I've always had you. Give it to me, Tim. Give it to me. You'll be a diadem, a crown. Just give it to me because I know what I'm doing. Give it to him.